Thank you very much for bearing with us. Today, our guest of honor, Dr. Ramchandran, sir. It's my privilege to introduce our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Ramchandran, sir. He did his BTech, MTech, and PhD from Osmania University. He has over 35 years of experience in teaching, research, and administration in well-reputed educational institutions all over South India. He is the former Vice Chancellor of Osmania University. To commence the second session of the webinar, may I request Professor S. Ramchandran, sir, Vice Chancellor, Anurag University, to address on this momentous occasion.
Yeah, good evening to all of you. Good evening. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, you are audible.
Yes, sir. You are audible, sir. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening once again. I am very happy that the language teachers are doing a webinar on a very important topic, that is problems and prospects of online language teaching. Of course, this problem is now universal. Not only the problem is for the online language teaching, but all of the subjects as well. I don't know much about the English language as such. But of course, we also deal with languages, programming languages, in fact, as a computer scientist. So I deal with programming language like, C, C++, Java, and I think of late we are talking about Python and so on. Of course, we also teach these languages. And one thing common to all these languages is, I think all of you are very familiar with Chomsky hierarchy. I think all of you are, you must be aware of these things, where Chomsky has categorized these languages into 4 types, and programming languages and natural languages also part of this hierarchy as well. And the programming languages also have evolved over a period of time, and it is because of this great work by Chomsky now we are able to write compilers automatically. Yeah, apart from that, I see many video lectures on the online, and sometimes I also hear to these English lectures. Okay. There are quite a few of them. Of course, we always look for the best of those. I don't want to, tell about those online English lectures, but I'm happy that you have recognized that that you have to look into this aspect of of doing research into this and finding ways and means to prepare these lectures, so that they appeal to a large number of students and they are very effective. In fact, there are a lot of work that has been done on online education. There are different models that have been evolved. Top universities already rolling out academic programs in online mode. In India also, UGC and AICT are pushing this online education in a big way. But I tell you that there is no institutional mechanism that is developed where actually we institutionalize this online education so far. But during this pandemic, people started thinking seriously about this aspect. I'm happy that the teachers are now open and they are looking at this aspect very seriously. There are some issues which probably we should look at. I have seen that people imitating the classroom now online. Yeah, that's giving that's a big problem because one has to look into this aspect and then see what is the best way we can deliver these lectures. Okay, simply you can't imitate the classroom in online. And apart from that, of course, once you go online, your lecture becomes global. That means people compare your lecture with other lectures that are available. And one way it helps us because, it helps in formulating quality lectures. Yeah, so you have to improve on and then make them very effective. There are other issues as well, the connectivity and device. Okay, I'll not go into the details, but then the technology is there already, and we have to look at how to make use of this technology and how do you take this online education to the students. This is exactly the reason why we are proposing an education technology center in Anurag University, where our teachers will be engaged in, looking at various aspects, including technology and the quality of lecture and what should be part of the lecture and what should not be part of the lecture. Okay, there are other aspects as well, the presentation skills and then language skills. All these things matter when you are preparing an online lecture. So exactly to look into all these aspects, we would like to have a center established in the university. I'm sure the faculty members will take it forward. Yeah, so far, as I told you, there's there's so many online platforms. I think Swayam is there, NPTEL is there, Coursera is there, all these already there. But quite often we leave it to the students, and and then the students, of course, go through these lectures. And UGC, interestingly, has allowed the universities to go to the extent of 20% of online education. I mean to say that 20% of the subjects can be taught online. And of course, some of the universities have taken it forward. If not 20%, a part of it is actually being conducted in online. I'm sure these webinars will help the faculty members. Yeah, please, explore the problems associated with, and probably you should be able to find solutions as well. There's a big potential, and we should not be hesitating to look at the problems and solutions. There are obvious advantages. I will not go into those details because, once it is online, the lecture is online, it reaches large number of students, and of course you can repeat any number of times, right? You can play at any time and so on. So those advantages are already there, and I'm sure I only see the positive side of this. And I'm sure, in future, our teachers will embrace this, mode of education in a big way. So at this point of time, I only wish that the lectures, part of this webinar will be useful to the faculty members, and it will be a useful exercise, I see. This again, once again, I congratulate the Department of English on Rock University for coming out with a brilliant idea, and I'm sure there will be positive outcome of this particular webinar. I'm sure we'll be overcoming all those problems that we see, and we'll be able to go forward in the direction of online education. With these few remarks, I once again thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your valuable message, and also we are glad that under your vice chancellorship you have introduced new courses like machine learning, artificial intelligence, and other demand-oriented courses like systems engineering and all. Thank you very much for all your support for making this event successful. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Before we go ahead for the second session to start, we'll try to watch a video about Anurag University.
Trailblazing edifice of technical education in Telangana, supported by world-class infrastructure, committed to create future-ready and industry-fit engineering minds. Anurag Group of
Thank you for watching. Now it's time for us to start the second session of the first day. It's my great honor to introduce Dr. Patricia Ackerman. She has been serving as Professor of Language Arts at Kansas State University for 20 years. She holds PhD in Language Arts Curriculum and Instruction, a master's degree in Liberal Studies. Her primary research interests include writing pedagogy, critical thinking, adaptability analysis, and tutorial discourse. Her academic awards include the Marchbanks Memorial Award for Outstanding Teaching, the MacArthur Family Faculty Fellow Award, and the President's Award for Outstanding Undergraduate Teaching. For the past 5 years, she has developed both undergraduate and graduate curricula in the discipline of technical writing. For the past 5 years, she has developed both undergraduate on technical writing. Now, I request Dr. Patricia E. Ackerman, Professor, Kansas University, Polytechnic Campus, Salina, to deliver a session on effective online teaching of technical writing skills. The presentation is followed by Q&A. If you have any Q&A, you can text in the chat box. Thank you, madam. Now I request Patricia ma'am to start the session, take over the session.
Your audio is muted.
Madam, kindly unmute your audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're audible. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. I welcome you all into my home during this COVID crisis, and I appreciate the opportunity to share with you. Not knowing all of your backgrounds and disciplines, I've tried to focus my topic in a direction that can provide you with some tools which would allow you to do some research and thinking on your own about teaching online writing. In particular, as I heard that you're working on a proposal for Anurag to start an educational technology center, the information I'm sharing today might also be helpful for that purpose. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, just a little bit of background. Oh, I was also going to say, if you have a question, I'm going to ask that you type it in the chat box, and at the in the interest of your time and continuity, if you would type your questions in the chat box after I've gone all of the way through my presentation, I'll go to the chat box and address those questions specifically. So feel free to write any questions in the chat box as we're discussing. So as he said, my name's Patricia Ackerman. I just completed my 20th year at Kansas State University. And I teach primarily in the language arts. And what I'd like to focus on, what I'm going to focus on today is, there we go, is online technical writing. But I know that you have other sessions about online teaching, and I'm going to talk specifically about looking at technical writing as a discipline through the lens of the plain English movement. And so I will be giving you some history and background about the plain English movement, how I've used it in my classrooms, and why it's relevant to the teaching of technical writing, especially on online platforms. So there we go. Just a little bit about my history. I've been through the entire tenure track system over the past 20 years. In that capacity, I've maintained numerous leadership roles in the undergraduate faculty senate, on the graduate council as the director of the Professional Master of Technology program. I've directed our writing center and worked as faculty development coordinator. Throughout that process, I published a book on the first university for women in the state of Kansas in a rural community. And as he mentioned, I was recently the Kaufman Chair for University Distinguished Teaching Scholars. And in that capacity, I directed a year of focused examination, discussion, and learning about how we teach students to think critically across disciplines in the university system. And at the bottom of the slide are again, the list of the awards, some of the awards that I've included or earned. The courses that I've taught at Kansas State University include academic writing and technical writing, expository writing. I've taught undergraduate and graduate technical communication, both online and face-to-face. For 20 years, I've taught a foundational reasoning course titled Introduction to Critical Thinking, which is my favorite course to teach. And I feel like it's been valuable to the students. And I have had opportunity to try and teach that course online. While it's a little more difficult for highly engaged discussion type courses, I was able to do that. I've taught ethics, public speaking, literature courses, and some freshman orientation types of courses. So just a preview of what I'm going to talk about. We're all aware that we're living in changing academic climates for a variety of reasons. I want to contextualize that. I want to speak for a moment about some of the differences between academic writing and technical writing that change our perspectives in how we engage students and get them involved in their written communication, and why that's even more important in today's environment. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of history about the plain English movement globally and kind of where it stands now, how I've used it in my classrooms to get students to think about their writing from a different perspective. And I'm also going to try to provide you with some tools and resources where you can do some further research on your own if you're interested in bringing the idea of plain English into your technical writing classrooms or other disciplines as well. And my assumption is that you're all going to receive a copy of this PowerPoint. So embedded in the slides are direct links to the resources that I'm sharing with you. So as we watch the PowerPoint or the slideshow on Anorak University, we became more aware of some of the vision and mission of your institution. And oops, oh no. All universities have academic missions and visions. And in that capacity, there are a lot of active verbs in this statement here about how we're going to create an atmosphere of intellectual curiosity, about academic freedom, breadth of thought and action, empowering students, all of those critical active verbs that are a part of the mission of what we try to do every day. And in that capacity, we then as institutions identify student learning outcomes that we're going to teach to try to make this vision come true. And at Kansas State University, we in 2004 adopted a set of undergraduate student learning outcomes that drive us. So every student who walks across the stage at graduation and shakes the hand of the president of the university, it's assumed by employers who see Kansas State University on their resume that those students excel in the following 5 areas, regardless of whether they're in the College of Veterinary Medicine, the College of Aviation, the College of Engineering. They should be able to demonstrate all of these areas. And the first one is knowledge, and knowledge includes both depth and breadth of knowledge, which means that they are experts in their field, content experts, but they also, since they're earning a university degree, must have breadth of knowledge. So they need to be fluent and understand history and sciences and mathematics and all of those things that may be outside of their specific discipline that help them function as professionals and citizens of a global world. So every program, regardless of what college it's in, must teach to these undergraduate student learning outcomes. Others are high levels of academic and professional integrity become increasingly important as we become a global economy, and with many of the things that have happened in the last 10 years, integrity becomes a part of what we should be sending students out in the world with. Increased levels of diversity awareness because they are working in a global community. But the 2 that I want to focus on specifically this morning are communication and critical thinking. So our definition of critical thinking as a student learning outcome, it primarily revolves around students being able to access and interpret large amounts of information, adapt to changing situations, make complex decisions, problem solving, evaluate actions. And we as educators know that these are huge issues and huge topics. What we learned throughout our year of critical thinking at Kansas State University is that critical thinking varies between disciplines. The type of logic and reasoning and thinking that are applied within disciplines very often depends on the content of that discipline. So there is flexibility in that. There are many varying definitions of critical thinking, but they all involve accessing information, making sense out of information, solving problems. And in that process, students then also have to learn how to communicate that information effectively. Unfortunately, our students live in a different world than when I was in the university many decades ago, and even 10 years ago. Because of changes in technology, their access to information has increased the content and the volume of information that they have access to, which makes the process of sifting through information and deciding what's good information and using that information to solve problems increasingly complex for our students. And the same is true of communication. Communication is much more complex now because students, I apologize for my dog barking in the background, because of technology and the advances in technology and the emerging technologies and platforms, it isn't as simple as students getting up and giving a report or writing a paper. So historically, academic writing, we had a preconceived notion of what academic writing was. Many of us who work in universities as academics, we've taught academic writing. That's what we're accustomed to. We're used to assigning research papers and essays and academic articles, oral presentations, outlines, annotated bibliographies. In my courses over the past 20 years, I always ask students if I tell you that one of my expectations for your written assignments are to give me only pieces of college level writing, what does that mean to you? Without fail, the students always tell me that means no spelling and grammar errors. So on the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see a list of a hierarchy of concerns as a teacher of writing, the things that are important to me, and they're in order of priority. So as a teacher of writing, my priorities are more on the focus and purpose of their paper, of their proposal or paper, whatever they're writing, how well they've developed it and supported claims of fact with credible evidence, whether it's organized in a way that makes sense, the tone and style that they are using, their vocabulary, the sentence fluency. And then finally, of course, I'm interested in proofreading and editing, but from a student's perspective, they think very often that what I'm interested in is them handing in something that doesn't have errors in it. And while that's true, it's easier to read a paper that's error-free than one that's filled with errors. There are many more levels of thinking that I want them to bring to the table when they're writing. But traditionally as academics, we have assigned academic types of assignments in the writing area. Our expectations, whether regardless of our discipline, are very often the same. But when you move into technology and the teaching of technical writing, this changes. One of the other things about traditional academic writing that's important to consider as we move toward talking about the plain English movement is that when students write academic types of papers, they're traditionally writing to a very narrow audience. The audience is primarily their instructor and the peers possibly in their classroom with whom they do guided peer review. But overall, their audience for an academic paper is an educated audience. If it's their peers, those students at least have a high school diploma. Their instructors come with advanced degrees. And so the expectations for an academic paper is that you have a well-developed vocabulary, that you're introducing complex information and making sense out of it in a way that's accessible to an educated audience. That may not always be the case for the audience of a piece of technical writing. In that capacity of academic writing, their objective typically is to demonstrate understanding of content, to inform their readers, to convince them or persuade them of something. But typically those audience have a specific level of education, which means that their ability to read complex documents is much more advanced than the general public. In technical communication, Markel, which is one of the standard textbooks in the teaching of technical communication, says that technical communication encompasses a set of activities that people do to discover and transmit information. But in technical communication, students may compose a variety of different types of documents with different purposes. I've listed some here: proposals, blogs, wikis, emails, social media, computer help files, infographics, digital media. And if you think about who the audiences are for these types of documents, yes, it may well be their instructor for their technical writing course. It may also be the peers in their classroom. But in an actual professional setting, their audience can be much broader. It might be employees, supervisors, customers, members of the general public. And these folks come to their document, to read their document, with diverse educational backgrounds. And so the students have to think much more critically about who their audience is and what their purpose is when they're creating a technical document than when they're creating a typical or traditional academic paper. Their goal in creating these technical documents is to help their target audience, whoever that is, find, understand, and use information effectively. Those three terms are critical, and we'll come back to them as I move into some information about plain language. So what I want to do is, some of you may be really familiar with the plain English movement and others not so much, but I want to talk about what plain language is. Now, one thing that some of us have been teaching online for more years than just the COVID crisis. And if you've been teaching online for any period of time, you know that the documents that you create in Canvas or Blackboard or whatever platform you're using are not traditional academic papers. If you give instructions in an online environment in a standard academic format using long narrative paragraphs filled with support information, the odds of a student actually reading all of those documents on their computer screen are reduced. When we begin teaching online, whether we're an academic in the social sciences or in the arts or in engineering, we also become technical writers, because online teaching models, what we're doing in creating our documents in an online teaching environment are technical communication documents. Another difference between academic writing and documents and technical writing and documents is the level of engagement with the reader. Readers of academic documents are typically more passive, whereas if you look at some of these types of technical documents that I've listed here, we as an author of these documents have an expectation that the readers are going to do something with this information. They're either going to apply it to some activity. If we're writing instructions, they're going to try to follow the instructions to accomplish a certain task. So it's a much more engaged form of writing. We aren't just writing it to send it out there so you all know what I'm thinking, but because we have an expectation for that reader to respond in some particular way. So it's a much more interactive process. And the same is true of online teaching. We are sending out information, we are writing documents from which we expect the viewers to respond in some way, to be able to follow our instructions, complete an assignment, engage in discourse with other members of the classroom, whatever it is that we're asking them to do. So when we become an online teacher, whether our discipline has anything to do with technical writing, we become technical writers. And in that capacity, we need to learn some of the principles that make technical writing documents more effective, that makes it easier for the students to find information, to understand the information when they find it, and to be able to use it for the purpose we intended. So online teaching faculty, if they have strong technical writing skills, it will enhance their online teaching effectiveness, and an awareness of plain English principles can enhance and strengthen their technical writing ability. For online student learners, if we can help them become aware of plain English principles, it can enhance the clarity and effectiveness of the documents that they create, not only for our assignments, but in their professional lives as they move forward. And an awareness of readability analysis can strengthen the relationships with readers. So again, COVID-19 has forced many of us who never thought we would be teaching in an online environment to cultivate rapid expertise in writing and presenting information and technical via digital media platforms and using emergent technologies. It's new for many, many academics. It's not something that they may have anticipated ever having to do, but in order to be more effective educators in an online environment, raising our awareness of these principles and applying them to our technical writing that we're doing as we create our courses can make our courses more effective. So over the last 10 years, I have taught writing courses using readability analysis. I have taught my students how to use readability analysis to look at their own writing through a different lens. The reason that I do that is I don't grade them on how their document is analyzed from a readability standpoint. But what I do want them to do is I want them to look at their writing not through my eyes, through a different perspective. So for instance, I might have a student who all through high school received A's on all of their papers, and they come in my class and I give them a C on a paper, and they come into my office and they're irate and they're angry, and they said, "You gave me a C, I am an A writer." And by taking their paper and running it through a software that analyzes their writing, I can easily show them that, look, on a readability scale, your writing is at a 6th grade reading level. And there are reasons for this, okay? And it gives it a little bit of objectivity, some measurement. It quantifies their writing a little bit. So it's not just my opinion, which is what they say, that's your opinion that I'm not writing at a college level. It makes it a little bit less my opinion and gives them a little more objectivity if they can look at their writing through the lens of readability analysis, which I'm going to share with you in a minute. So thinking of this process through can also make our online teaching more accessible. It can enhance student skills, and it can make our online teaching more effective. So a little bit about the history of readability analysis. In the 1940s, military leaders became aware that some of the documents that they were creating or giving to enlisted men to read were written above their heads. They weren't able to read them. They were very academic, the vocabularies were too advanced, and the average person in the 1940s didn't come in with advanced degrees, and very often not with a high school diploma. And so Rudolf Flesch in 1940, who was an Austrian author, writing consultant, and strong supporter of the plain English movement, advocated not only a return to phonics, but he proposed a formula called the Reading Ease Readability Formula, which I'm going to share with you in a minute. Later in 1976, John Kincaid adapted Rudolf Flesch's formula, and at a request from the United States Navy, who wanted to be able to analyze the documents they were producing for their enlisted men, and also Kincaid wanted to explore the possibility of using a readability analysis of a piece of text for educational purposes. So Flesch's original formula looks like this. If you run a piece of text, a paragraph, a block of text through the Flesch Reading Ease software, it will rate that text on a 100-point scale. The higher the score, the easier it is to understand the document. Most standard documents, for instance, journalists are taught that their audience probably reads at a 7th grade level. And so students in journalism are taught how to use neutral language and active verbs. And the reason journalist articles are very often written in narrow columns is because there have been studies done to show that that makes it easier for someone to read, more accessible. So this is Flesch's formula, where he incorporates the average sentence length and the average number of words per syllable in the formula to analyze a piece of text and decide what level a piece of text scores at. So 90 to 100 is easily understandable by the average 11-year-old. 60 to 70 is easily understandable by an average 13 to 15-year-old, which is what's considered for average public consumption. And a score of 0 to 30 is best understood by college graduates. There are some examples of documents here that where articles have been analyzed and given a score. So you'll see Reader's Digest has a higher score, so it's understandable by an audience, a lesser advanced audience, whereas the Harvard Law Review scores very low under Flesch's score and has a level of 30. Kincaid modified that formula and changed it so that the result was to give a grade level to that score. So rather than a 0 to 100 scale, where the highest score was a lower reading level and the low score was a higher reading level, his formula used average sentence length and average syllables per word to place a grade level on a piece of text. Now, this became a very valuable tool because now educators could use this formula to analyze a textbook to see if a social studies textbook, for instance, was more appropriate for a 4th grade reading level or an 11th grade reading level. Originally, when Kincaid's formula came out, we didn't have high-speed computers and technology that we have today. So I have colleagues whose part of their job as being members of textbook communities in the 70s and 80s would actually have to manually go through and analyze the number of words in each sentence of a piece of text and the number of syllables per word, which was measuring vocabulary level, and manually use this formula and assess whether a textbook was appropriate for what particular grade level. We're fortunate now, we all live in an age of high technology, and there are software systems that are able to run this algorithm and decide whether or not a textbook is appropriate for a particular grade level in the education system. Some of the practical applications that readability analysis formulas have been used for, obviously textbook selection committees use them to decide what texts are appropriate for what reading level. Many US government and military agencies now require documents and forms to meet specific readability levels. The Department of Defense uses Flesch's reading ease test. I have Florida here, but many insurance companies now are using readability scores to assess whether or not the documents they're writing are accessible to the customers or clientele that they're serving. They're in Florida, for instance, they require that insurance policies have a Flesch-Kincaid score of 45 or higher. So if you remember back to that 0 to 100 score, 45 or higher would be a much more accessible readability level of a document. Since the 70s, many computer software programs have incorporated a readability score into their software. Google Docs, Lotus, Microsoft Word, all use a Flesch-Kincaid grade readability analysis test is incorporated into the software if you know where to find it. So for me, in my writing courses, I frequently have students take a particular piece of writing and run it through that software to see what reading level an essay that they write, for instance, what reading level it is, because it's really an eye opener for a student when they can see that they've written a paper that I tell them needs to be college level, that's showing up as a 6th or 7th grade readability score. And my point to them is, no, I'm not grading you on this readability score, but I want you to see the difference between a piece of 6th grade level writing and a piece of a college level piece of writing. And through that process, I then teach them if they will revise their document and increase the number of active verbs, if they will eliminate grammar and mechanical errors, if they will enhance their vocabulary, if they will add make sure that they have a variety of sentence lengths, not all long rambling sentences or short choppy sentences, but a blend of sentence lengths, then they can continue to run that text through the readability software, and they can actually see their document becoming more and more readable as their score changes in that readability analysis. And so through that lens, they're having an opportunity to study and think about their own writing from a more objective point of view, and it no longer becomes just my opinion, that they could make some changes, could make this a more readable document. I've been to many, many conferences with professional writers of both fiction and nonfiction, and I'm amazed at how many of those professional writers tell me that they use these audience analysis and readability tools to make sure that their novel, for instance, is being written at the proper readability level for the audience they're intended. This is particularly true for folks who are writing young adult literature. You know, if they're writing for a 6th or 7th grade audience and they're writing at a 12th grade reading level, the odds of that audience being able to grasp or comprehend, or the average members of that audience, are decreased. And so they use this tool to assess whether they're targeting the right audience with the type of writing that they're doing. In Microsoft Word, I've given you some specific instructions here about how to test a document for a readability score to see what reading level it's playing out at. And I've just shared that with you, but it's available in many forms of software. Now, there are some limitations, and this is a different subject for another day, but I wanted to share these resources for any of you who are in language arts, who are interested in how to use these readability analysis tools for classroom instruction. There are some limitations to doing that. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to use it with a 5th grade writer, for instance, who might not have the cognitive aptitude, not recognize issues of cohesion and coherence and surface characteristics that's common to our classrooms. For instance, you can't just pull a passive verb out of a sentence and plug an active verb in there without it changing the context or the fluency of the sentence. So they then need to reread and revise the sentence to make sure that it's fluent. Those are some limitations of using the software, because students think that the software is going to fix it for them, and it won't. It will only point out problems. So these are just resources for those of you who teach writing for a living. So back to the plain English movement. So we talked about Rudolf Flesch in the 1940s, creating the reading ease formula. We talked about John Kincaid adapting that formula in the 70s so that we now come out with a grade level score. So these are some things that have happened more recently in the plain English movement. I'm going to speak from the perspective of the aerospace industry because I teach at the College of Technology and Aviation. But I'm going to use this as a specific example of how one industry has embraced the plain English movement and turned it into some guidelines and regulations to make technical documents more accessible to readers on a global scale. So the aerospace and defense industries have formally recognized that English is the international language of science, technology, aerospace, while they also know that English may not be the primary language of the readers of these technical documents. And so their challenge was, how do we help folks who write technical documents make it easier for all readers to find, understand, and use information in the way that we intend them to. So the European Association of Aerospace Industries partnered with the Aerospace Industries Association of America in 1970s to form an organization whose goal was to determine, to follow up on their recognition that a simplified language was necessary in order for correct maintenance, operation, and public safety in the aviation industry. So if a jet plane is produced in Wichita, Kansas, and is purchased by a company in the Middle East, those aviation maintenance workers need to be able to follow the instructions, the technical documents that are written to repair and maintain that airplane, regardless of where it's at. And so they were looking at ways to make those technical documents more universal, more accessible, more understandable. So in 1983, this organization that they formed as a partnership created and adopted what is called the Simplified English, well, it was the Simplified English Work Group, created the Simplified Technical English Manual, which is what's used primarily in Europe. And it was actually published in 1986. What it contains are specifications for preparation of technical documentation in a controlled language environment. It includes a set of writing rules that speak specifically to grammar and style. And it also provides a very, very detailed dictionary that contains industry acceptable word use. I'm going to show you this manual. I'm going to have to stop sharing this screen and share another screen with you. Well, there it is. Okay, Dr. Dandu, can you tell me, can you see a screen that says ASD?
No, I'm not able to see that one. I think
You're still not able. Let me
Yeah.
try. Let me
is that
try.
window if you can?
Yeah, let me try one more thing. Are you able to see it now?
Yeah, it is
Yes,
coming. Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so let me, oh no. Just a minute. To make this bigger, get rid of this. All right, so I have provided a link in my PowerPoint so that you on your own can go to the ASD Simplified Technical English Manual. I will tell you that this is a 400-page long document, and it includes the history of the Simplified Technical English movement, who created it. There's a very in-depth table of contents. So if it's something that's appropriate for your technical writing courses, this may be something you want to research. I'm trying to get down to, it talks specifically about how particular terms can be used, but there's also a section here about the Simplified Technical English, why it was developed, who is it intended for, how they're using it globally in the technical industries. And so even making students aware that such a thing exists, if they're going to be working in professions where technical communication is a standard form of communication, makes this a valuable teaching tool. But it's also valuable for us as educators who are now being asked to become technical communicators in online teaching environments. I'm going to go back. So I just wanted you, one, to see that document and to make sure that you are able to access it. Let me get back to my shared screen. Okay, are we back to the PowerPoint? Can you see the PowerPoint, the simplified technical English page?
Yes.
Thank you. So I talk about simplified technical English as part of the plain English movement. I will tell you that historically, the group who has been opposed to the plain English movement have been the legal profession. They don't like the notion of a simplified language, but we all know that attorneys their part of their training is to use language as a vehicle to guide thinking and sometimes obfuscate things. So, but overall, and as academics, we don't always have a lot of experience with plain language and technical English. But as you can see here, there are industries across the nation who are coming together and demanding that we that we move the plain English movement forward and make publications that are more accessible. So more recently in history, sorry, for some reason my PowerPoint isn't wanting to advance now. Let me back out here again. Try again, sorry. Technology is our friend, right?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it's visible.
My slide, my PowerPoint is locked up, so I'm gonna have to back out again and try one more thing. Okay, so I've shared Rudolph Flesch and John Kincaid's scores with you. We talked a little bit about practical application. Moving forward in history, we just talked about the simplified technical English, and now I want to talk to you about what's happened recently in this decade. Still there. So on October 10th, 2010, President Obama signed the Plain English Initiative into law for the US government agencies. Basically, that means that as US government agencies create new documents for public viewing and consumption, that they have to meet the standards of the plain English movement. And they have created a set of standards surrounding that I'm going to show you. It's a little bit different than the simplified technical English guidelines that are used in Europe. But it's an example. I'm going to use the aviation industry again specifically as an example to show you how this is happening, how technical documents are being created using standard guidelines. So Raju, can you see the FAA plain language basic course?
Yes.
Thank you.
I mean, but I only see the link.
You only see the link, so I need to back up and change to something else. How about now?
No, I think, maybe you have to go to another window.
Okay, I'll stop and do that. That's why I always check. I don't want to assume that you can see something you can't. How about now?
It's coming.
Yes, we are able to see.
Okay, so this is the website of the Federal Aviation Administration's Plain Language Basic Course. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but I am going to tell you that in my technical writing courses, because I have 80% of my students are studying some type of aeronautical industry, they're either in aviation maintenance or professional pilots, I require each of my students in my technical writing course to take this FAA Plain Language Basic course. It's part of the course content. And through this, what the students tell me is, oh, this makes so much sense to me. And for some people in the English professions, they may say, well, we're dumbing it down for them. No, we're teaching them to write to audiences who may not read at a college reading level, and to create documents that they may actually have to produce in their careers. So I require my technical writing students to take all 9 of these modules. And the things that they'll learn in there is what is plain language? Why have we made it a law in the United States and government? Also, many industries are now adopting plain language as a standard in their professions. There are tools in each of these tutorials to help them understand, but specifically the things that they learn are how to use a technically appropriate vocabulary, how to use personal pronouns to speak directly to their audience, which in academic writing, we've been teaching them for academic purposes. They should be more often writing with no personal pronouns from an objective point of view for credibility and other reasons. But in technical writing, they should be using pronouns. It also teaches them how to recognize overuse of passive voice and how to increase their use of passive voice and how that actually changes the dynamics of a piece of writing and makes it more accessible to a reader. And there are a lot of, they're very short. They're like 9 minutes. There are 9 of them. There may be 6 minutes a piece. So it takes a student about an hour to complete the course. So part of my online technical writing training is to use this great tool that the Federal Aviation Administration has created for their employees, required by their employees, but they've also made available to the public. At this website, you'll also find an article about plain language. You'll find additional tools. There's the FAA Plain Language Toolkit, which I also had open. Let's see if I can show it to you. No, it's not happening. Okay, so let me go back to that page. No. But I have provided links for you to the FAA Plain Language site, and I will tell you that are you back at my PowerPoint now, Raju?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So you can see how the FAA is using plain English to produce more effective technical documents for public consumption. And so I want my students to be aware of that. It's also good for them. I tell them, put this on your resume that you took the FAA's plain language course, because it demonstrates that you're familiar with a regulatory agency that you're going to be working with and that they value plain language and that you've had some experience and practice in that. And at the same time, it helps them understand some of the principles of developing technical writing in an online environment. So I've provided you here in the PowerPoint links to explore that a little further on your own. For some reason, my PowerPoint keeps freezing up. I'm going to try sharing it one more time. Okay. So that is now law in the United States for all government agencies. All government agencies are now required, federal agencies are now required to have a plain English representative on their staff, whose job it is to assist employees with training and understanding and publication of documents in the plain English language. There we go. Okay, so basic principles of plain English is how can we help readers find, understand, and use information in technical documents. And one of the first places we as online educators need to look is in the construction of our own courses, because we have those same objectives that technical writers have. We want our students to be able to find what they need in our online course format. We want them to understand what they find, and then we want them to be able to use it to complete the assignments and be successful in our courses. So Some of the issues surrounding finding information has to do with knowing who their audience is, recognizing which emergent technologies would be most appropriate for creating documents, what formats, they need to learn about design elements, planning, layout, the use of white space, how to chunk information and use graphic organizers. But we as educators need to learn those same things as we design our technical writing courses. Once they find that information, when they read it, we need to use keywords and define keywords. We need to use a vocabulary that's appropriate for whatever technical purpose document we're creating. We need to define keywords. We need to think about the sentence structure and the grammar and the use of active voice and speaking directly to the readers using personal pronouns and writing in present tense. All of those things make it easier for students or the general public, if that's who's reading their technical document, to understand that information. And then we need to communicate the intent clearly. What is it if I'm writing instructions about how to install a battery in a jet airplane, I need to explain to them clearly what the dangers and expectations are and the steps for doing that so that they have a positive outcome. So those are the goals not only of technical communication, but they're the goals of educators in online environments. So there's a lot of crossover that we as educators need to transition our thinking from that academic writing mindset more into the principles of technical writing and the principles of plain English that can help us be more effective in our online teaching. So, and basically this repeats what I just said. Our students need to be able to find the information, understand it, and use it. And that thinking needs to be the foundation of effective online course design. Yes, there are a lot of tools we can learn. We can learn a lot of I've learned so many different software platforms in the last 60 days. But if I don't have these basic principles in my mind, all of the tools are useless to me unless I know what my purpose is. So again, in the PowerPoint, I've embedded a lot of resources about plain language because that's what I really want you to walk away and think about today. And some the resources to the plain language websites. And both the Simplified Technical English link and the FAA Plain Language have links to historical information if you're wanting to do more research about the credibility of this system before you begin incorporating into your courses. All of these links have information that will help you do that research. And I've also provided you with references regarding the history of the plain English movement and some of the technical resources. So I'm going to back out of my PowerPoint and ask at this time if you would like to ask questions in the chat room. And I will try to respond.
And I'll be,
Yes, sir.
what is the role of
Dr.
plain English in academic writing? I know Naresh would like to know that. What is the role of plain English in academic writing?
I think that depends on the discipline. Obviously, if you are asking a student to write a paper for a psychology class or a sociology class, you probably are going to have them write it in the form of a research paper, and that will be traditional academic writing. But many of our students are being asked to write white papers now. And white papers are more of a technical document. They're geared more towards a business audience. If you do research into the writing of white papers, they're kind of a crossover between academic writing and technical writing. So I think it depends on your discipline greatly as to how much, but regardless of that, if you're teaching an academic subject in an online environment, it's still important to learn and understand how to do that using technical communication skills, because online teaching is primarily technical writing. Even if you're teaching an academic subject, the content is academic, but the actual teaching process uses technical writing principles. Does that help answer your question? Yes,
Thank you, ma'am.
yes, you're welcome. Other questions?
Ajmihar Noor would like to know that should you write our academic papers in easy or very standard English?
Well, it depends again who you're writing that academic paper for. If you're a graduate student and you're writing a paper for someone in an upper level, a professor in an upper level course about the theory of some discipline, then obviously you're going to, you need to ask the instructor what their expectations are. Okay, if I'm an academic and I'm teaching a graduate level course in my content area, I'm probably going to want them to write it in a particular format, APA, Chicago, Turabian, MLA, and in that the student will have to follow those guidelines. But if I'm teaching in a discipline that's where business, professional, technical communication, then I might want my students to use more, for instance, write a white paper and use technical communication principles.
Thank you.
It depends. You need to ask your instructor. That's my best advice. Always ask.
As a second language learner, how can I improve my writing skills in English? Ambika would like to know.
I have 24 students in my online summer course right now. 10 of them are second language learners. My goal is in an online forum. It's difficult because if I'm meeting with them face to face, I might have them read their paper out loud to me so that they can hear mistakes that they might have. But in an online environment, that's more difficult. So my goal is always to provide them with as many online tools as possible to assist them with that, and to also create opportunities for them to have to engage with those tools. And it's one thing to say, hey, run your paper through Grammarly software or proofread your document really well. That doesn't mean they will, but instead I ask them to seek out someone in their profession to do an external review of a document they're creating for me so that they get that external feedback and they can have that conversation about their writing. Those are things that are really, really valuable to second language learners. So just put as many tools in their hands as possible and create assignments that force them to use those tools so they can come to recognize their value.
Yeah. Could you suggest some of the software for writing skill improvement?
Is that a question?
Yes. Could you suggest some of the software for writing skill improvement?
Which is a good software?
Yes.
Is that what I'm, yeah. I've used, for many, many years, I used Writer's Workbench with students very successfully. Our college stopped subscribing to the software, so I don't anymore. Most recently, I've been asking all students, especially in technical writing, to apply the Grammarly software. And while it's not without flaws, it does give them opportunity for a different type of feedback. You know, they can get, the more feedback they get about their writing, the more they're able to think critically, not just about the content of what they're writing, but their writing process. So recently I've been using the Grammarly software. I'm not advocating a particular brand, but I do know that Grammarly has free software, which makes it more accessible to everyone. But in our college, we also subscribe to Grammarly, so our students have access to the advanced version, which provides them with more tools. And there are many, and I also have colleagues who absolutely will not allow their students to use software because then they think that it's not purely the student's work if they're getting feedback through technology. My thoughts are the more opportunities a student has to read and revise their work, the better their writing will become.
Thank you, ma'am. Vamparla VSS Nagalakshmi would like to know, what technical tools do you suggest for good learning outcomes, especially for primary school children? I repeat, what technical tools do you suggest for good learning outcomes, especially for primary school children?
Well, I'm not an elementary school teacher, But in my degree in education and my experience, I think, and I've actually worked with some parents who've been trying to educate their children at home in recent months. And for children, just creating more opportunities for them to write is critical. Even if it's writing a weekly letter to their grandparents. The more they write, the more they take the symbols of language that they've been taught and attach them to all the things that are floating around in their head, and they make those connections, and they actually write simple, anything that you can do to get them to write letters, write cards, write stories. And yes, there's software available, but it's really just that act of writing and reading. Reading is critical to development of strong writing skills.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Do we relate plain English to English for specific purpose, which was very popular in 1970s and 80s?
Okay, I'm not sure I understand the question. The
Do we-
plain English.
Yeah, do we relate plain English to English for specific purpose,
Yeah.
ESP?
Yeah. It's all part of that plain English movement. And it's in education, everything we do is like a pendulum. We're in favor of it, and then we're against it, and then we try new things, and then we try some other new things. And ESP, I think, was just part of that process of getting to where we are today. And I'm not advocating that the whole world needs to adopt plain English for everything, but I am saying that for technical writing, it's a valuable tool. For online education, it is a valuable tool because online educators are technical writers.
Thank you. Rebecca Rex would like to know, how effective do you think bringing this method of analysis would work in India? Because there are many languages here in India, and there is always influence of these languages in our learned up English.
Well, I keep thinking about the European collaboration and the Simplified Technical English Manual, and the example that they use about, for instance, the aviation industry. We live in a global marketplace. I purchase things from India, and when they come to me, I get instructions or manuals included in them that I may or may not be able to understand. And the same is true for you. You all may order products from our country that come with instructions. So the intent is, how do we make that process more uniform so that it's more accessible? But it does assume that everyone has some understanding and ability to use the English language, and that's not always a proper assumption. So, but the Simplified Technical English does assume that English is a primary language.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Giri Prasad would like to know, what is the difference between technical communicator and general communicator?
And technical and what? General?
General, yeah, general.
Gender communication or
General communication.
I'm not understanding completely.
No, the regular communicated.
Just general communicate, regular
Yes,
communicate.
yes.
Right. I think one of the main differences is the expectation. In technical communication, we have an expectation from our audience. In general communication, sometimes it's just to get our opinion out there, or to express something, or to teach something, or to inform something. In technical communication, we need something back from our audience. Okay, we need them to follow instructions. We need them to understand that our company is implementing a new policy. It's a more interactive form of communication. And it's also frequently more international in terms of the things that we publish on the internet, and all of these various genres and forms and different platforms are accessible to so many different types of people, whereas general communication is more localized from my point of view, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for your patience and answering all the questions. Lastly, I request Mr. C.H. Srinivas, Assistant Professor of English, to propose vote of thanks for this session.
Well, now this is the time to express my vote of thanks. So firstly, I would like to express my vote of thanks our resource person, Dr. Patricia Ackerman, for taking time and risk to bring forth this presentation on effective online teaching of technical writing skills with loads of information, which is beneficial for industries and also for education institutions. And I would like to extend my thanks to Dr. S. Ramchandra, Vice Chancellor of Anurag University, for appreciating the proposal of organizing two-day international webinar. And I also express my thanks to Dr. GVS Ananthalakshmi Madam, Head of the Department of English and convener of this entire event, for leading us and giving us a meticulous guidance in every step of this program. Lastly, I also express my special thanks to Dr. M. Srinivas sir, co-convening host and also the moderator, for putting to work all his efforts for the success of this program. And also, I express my thanks to all the English faculty, fulfilling the given responsibilities and roles. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Srinivas. Now I request Dr. Ananthalakshmi ma'am to give concluding remarks.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I hope that you all have access to the PowerPoint so that you can look at those tools yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Patricia Ackerman. Thank you for
Dr.
sparing your time. And really, it is very great knowledge share. You could able to give us thought-provoking kind of ideas how to deal with the technical writing and all. Even we have the open elective like technical and business communication, and even the business communication is different and technical writing is different. We have here different schools like engineering, school of engineering, school of management studies, school of pharmacy. Every student's expectation is different when it comes to communication. We could able to understand, and the examples shown by you are really useful for all the participants, I think. So I once again thank you for this. So hope all the participants have enjoyed and could able to understand and the seriousness behind the technical writing, and also the various links shared by ma'am should be utilized further, and we can catch up her through her email ID. So I once again thank you all. And tomorrow morning we'll be joining with Dr. Deepa Shafi from Simplified University. So let us have a great day today. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lakshmi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tomorrow morning, we'll be meeting at 8:30 for the third session of day 2. Special thanks to Raju Dandu sir for making his time to be here. So, thank you very much. We'll be meeting tomorrow at 8:30 sharp. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dandu.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you very much. I request all the participants to fill up the feedback form, which has been shared in the chat box for the second session. Thank you very much, madam. See you tomorrow morning at 8:30. Good night, everyone.